Arya touched her horns and was quite stunned. Am I going to be like Oxy? Wouldn't I look really ugly? Arya muttered, and then she shook her head and ran outside. Yang Yi was still practicing with the sword gourd high above in the clouds. Yang Yi had gotten addicted to practicing with the sword gourd, because he noticed that it was really powerful, and if it was used to launch surprise attacks it would be absolutely matchless. Dead before seeing anyone, that was what the sword scroll called it. However, Yang Ye's current speed wasn't really sufficient to soundlessly kill a limit-breaker realm expert. Train to the death. Needless to say, Yang Ye's improvement was very swift with Sword Scroll's guidance, and it could be described as being capable of rivaling the speed of gods. Yang Yi felt quite a bit of admiration towards Sword Scroll. Sword Scroll's knowledge in the Sword Dao was much, much greater than his own. Especially some minor techniques, it was exactly these minor techniques that were extremely helpful to him. At this moment, he understood why Xianxia said Sword Scroll would be able to help him in the future. In the sky, Yang Yi sat on a cloud while Snowy stood on his shoulder, and Sword Scroll and Arya were by his side. Besides that, there was Oxy who had an axe on his back. Presently, Oxy was using the primordial axe of creation, and Sword Scroll had even taught Oxy 3 moves. According to her, they were demon techniques. In Eternal Universe, many great demons possessed various demon-divine techniques and demon techniques. These demons who possessed such techniques were extremely terrifying. Simply speaking, Oxy was growing stronger and stronger. Sword Scroll glanced at the sword gourd by Yang Ye's waist, and then she waved her hand. It immediately descended into her grasp. She spun it around and said, "This sword gourd has another extremely formidable ability, and it's the essence of this sword gourd. It is its limitlessness." Limitlessness, Yang Yi said. Be a little more specific. Sword Scroll nodded and said, place your Sword Supreme and Sword Precursor within it. Then so long as you possess enough profound energy, mental strength, and soul energy, you can instantly launch 2 flying swords. 2 flying swords that can kill any enemy. Moreover, 2 isn't the limit of this sword gourd. If you have 10 swords, you can launch 10 of them at once, even 100. Just think about it. If 100 swords are instantly launched during battle, how terrifying would that be? She paused for a moment and continued, however, the sword gourd's requirements toward swords is extremely high. If Snowy hadn't increased the strength of their spirits, those 3 ancient swords within it would have shattered after being launched just 4 or 5 times by the sword gourd. So, if you have the opportunity, collect more good swords. Of course, the important matter at hand for you is to cultivate and strive to improve the speed of your sword to your current limits. My limits? Yang Yi asked. What are my limits? She grinned. Instantly killing a 2-world realm expert. That's your current limit. Instantly killing 2 world realm experts. Yang Yi fell silent. How fast would his swords have to be in order to accomplish that? And how strong would they have to be too? Meanwhile, Sword Scroll turned around. You must be strong, extremely strong. You understand what I mean. She vanished on the spot once she finished speaking. Yang Yi fell silent for a long time, and then he shook his head and smiled. He looked at Snowy, who was on his shoulder, and she was staring at the sword gourd. Obviously, she wanted to play with it. Yang Yi waved his right hand, and the sword gourd appeared before Snowy. He smiled. Play if you want to, but you can only play for an hour. Snowy immediately hugged Yang Ye's head and kissed him on the forehead. After that, she grabbed the sword gourd and slapped it. A sword howl resounded. A ray of light tore through the clouds, and if one looked up from down below, one would notice that the entire sky had been cut open. From then on, besides cultivating, Yang Yi played with Snowy and Arya. Of course, he did one more thing, mutual cultivation. This period of time was absolutely fun for Yang Yi. Every single session of mutual cultivation didn't just give him physical pleasure. There was mental pleasure as well. Of course, the most important aspect was the increase in strength. After cultivating in the Yin-Yang scroll, every session of mutual cultivation gave him a huge increase in strength. He was certain that if he stopped suppressing his cultivation right now, he would rise to the peak of the World Lord realm. However, he suppressed that impulse. Suppression. Suppress until he couldn't anymore. Now, he was very well aware that he could still suppress it, and he could do it for a very long time. Outside the primordial pagoda, after they received his eternal immortal crystals, the North Charge Sect and Skywalker Sect did everything they could to locate Nanjing. They'd practically sent out all their eyes and ears, and they even used many other avenues to search for Nanjing. However, they weren't able to find any information on her. In the hall of North Charge Sect, there were only 3 people here: Yang Yi, Yi Tianxing, and Li Yuan. Yi Tianxing laughed bitterly. "Young brother Yang, I'm sorry. We haven't been able to find any leads in the last 10 days. Yang Yi shook his head slightly. "It's not your fault. Someone has concealed her from the workings of the heavens. So it's normal that you're unable to locate her." Yi Tianxing and Li Yuan exchanged glances, and they saw bitterness in each other's eyes. If they could find a Nanjing for Yang Yi, he would definitely owe them a huge favor. Unfortunately, even with all the resources they possessed, they still weren't able to locate any information on her. Moreover, they even wondered if she really was in divine martial world. Meanwhile, Yang Yi stood up. "I think it's time I took my leave." Yi Tianxing asked, "You're leaving?" Yang Yi nodded. "Thanks for your hospitality, but I'd like to search around at other places." Yi Tianxing hesitated for a moment and said, "You can try divine martial capital. There's a place called the Divine Martial Sect there, and it's the #1 sect of this world. Its ancestor, Xiao Shenwu, went to Eternal Border in the past. I heard he even made a great name for himself over there. If you're able to gain their help, then you'll have a very good chance of locating your friend if she's in Divine Martial World." Yang Yi asked, "The Divine Martial Sect?" Yi Tianxing nodded. "It enjoys a great amount of prestige in Divine Martial World, and it's the largest sect here. If they give the order to search for someone, countless smaller sects will work with them. However, it's probably not easy to obtain their help. But I don't think you're an ordinary person, so you can give it a try." If the strength Yang Yi revealed wasn't that unfathomable, he wouldn't have made such a suggestion. Because the Divine Martial Sect was the largest sect in Divine Martial World, so they wouldn't even bother to entertain the requests of any ordinary person. The Divine Martial Sect. Yang Yi nodded, committed it to memory, and then cupped his fist. "Farewell." Once he finished speaking, he turned around and left. He saw someone outside the hall. It was Yi Xiaotian. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment, and then he flicked a sword over to her. It was one of those 3 ancient swords. Yang Yi smiled. "During this time that you were practicing, I noticed you didn't have a suitable sword. I obtained this one by chance. Don't bring shame to it." Yang Yi transformed into a ray of light and vanished on the spot. The others here were stunned on the spot. A sword. The sword in front of her was a pseudo-divine treasure. A real pseudo-divine treasure. The entire North Charge Sect only had one of them. Yet now, Yang Yi had casually given her another. Yi Tianxing and Li Yuan exchanged glances, and there was a wisp of shock in their eyes. Of course, there was greater pleasant surprise in Yi Tianxing's eyes. Yi Xiaotian was stunned for quite a long time, and then she stretched out her hand and grabbed it. The sword shook slightly, and then she hurriedly said, I'll take good care of you. We'll travel the worlds and carry out righteous deeds. All right?" The ancient sword remained silent. Meanwhile, Yi Tianxing suddenly asked, "Xiao Tian, did he say anything about his origins?" She put the sword away, hesitated for a moment, and said, "He said that it's best if we don't have too much ties with him. He said it's for our own good." Yi Tianxing and Li Yuan exchanged glances. In the end, Li Yuan shook his head and sighed. "He possesses such strength at his young age, and his aura of slaughter is too thick. While he doesn't seem like a bad person, he isn't anyone ordinary. Just as he said, it's best if we stay out of the kind of circle he's in. Otherwise, we'll die before we know it." Yi Tianxing nodded. "Indeed. Sigh, I wonder who he is." Yi Xiaotian suddenly grinned. Because Yang Yi had told her that she could go look for him in Eternal Border when she was free. Eternal Border. Yang Yi was from Eternal Border. Suddenly, a black-robed man appeared in the hall. and they were shocked by the sight of him. Yi Tianqing sized up the man and asked, "May I know who you are?" The man spoke indifferently. "Do you know where Yang Yi is going?" He was ordered to follow Yang Yi, but Yang Yi had been too fast when he left North Charge Sect just now, so he hadn't been able to keep up at all. Coupled with the fact that he didn't dare to get too close to Yang Yi, he'd lost Yang Yi. Thus, he had no choice but to come here and ask about Yang Yi. Yang Yi. Yi Tianqing and Li Yuan exchanged glances, and then Yi Tianqing shook his head. "I don't know." "You don't know?" The black-robed man's voice became quite cold, and then he looked at Yi Xiaotian. "You just had to gain guidance in the sword Dao from him. What can you do after learning it anyway?" As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand at her from afar. Hiss! Hiss! She hadn't even been able to react before her arms fell to the ground, and blood sprayed out like fountains. Yi Xiaotian was stunned. "How dare you!" Yi Tianqing howled with fury, and then a powerful aura slammed down at the black-robed man. The limit-breaker realm. The black-robed man's voice had a trace of disdain in it as he waved his right hand. Bang! The hall exploded apart while Yi Tianqing was blasted backward. The explosion alarmed the entire North Charge Sect. Countless disciples looked toward the hall. Yi Tianqing gazed at the black-robed man with astonishment. "The two-world realm? You're a two-world expert." The black-robed man walked slowly in Yi Tianqing's direction. "I'll ask one last time. Where did Yang Yi go? If you don't give me an answer in 3 breaths of time, then this sect will be the tomb of everyone here." Li Yuan was about to say something when Yi Tianqing suddenly shook his head. "Brother Li Yuan, don't believe him. He won't spare us regardless of what we tell him, as expected of a sect's master." The black-robed man spoke coldly. "You understand things well. However, while the outcome is still death, I can give you a quicker death." Yi Tianqing laughed bitterly. "Just because we know Yang Yi?" "Yes," the black-robed man said. "Anyone who knows him or is linked to him must die." Yi Tianqing was puzzled. "Why?" The man suddenly said. 3 breaths of time have passed." He raised both his hands before him. In an instant, the entire North Charge Sect shook, and an invisible wave of pressure enveloped it. A two-world realm expert. Despair covered their faces. The black-robed man suddenly lifted his right hand. "A bunch of ants!" He was about to push his hand down once he finished speaking. However, he suddenly turned around, and he saw a ray of light descend from the sky. A moment later, it arrived before him. He was shocked and raised his right hand to stop it. Bam! A sword appeared at the center of his palm, a sword that emanated sword energy. The black-robed man held onto the sword with everything he had, and a solemn expression filled his eyes. Suddenly, the sword shook violently. Bang! The black-robed man was blasted over 1 kilometer away. As soon as he stopped himself, the sword shot forward again, and it was so fast that everyone here could only see a ray of light flash. A vicious glow flashed through the black-robed man's eyes. He raised both his hands, and a blood-red shield immediately appeared before him and obstructed Yang Ye's sword, a pseudo-divine treasure. However, Yang Ye's sword precursor had become a divine treasure. So, as soon as they collided, the shield started cracking apart. The black-robed man was shocked and hurriedly shot backward while putting the shield away. Meanwhile, a man appeared before him. It was Yang Yi, of course. Yi Tianqing and Li Yuan heaved sighs of relief when they saw Yang Yi because a two-world realm expert wasn't an existence they could resist. Yang Yi glanced at Yi Xiaoyan's ghastly pale face, and then his own expression instantly turned icy cold. He issued a command in his heart and sent her into the primordial pagoda. Without primordial violet energy, she would die within 10 minutes. Yang Yi looked up at the black-robed man. The Freedom Sect? Longevity Sect? Creation Sect? Immortality Sect? Or Guardians? The black-robed man didn't say anything. He just turned around with the intent to leave, but a ray of sword energy suddenly appeared before his forehead. A flying sword. The black-robed man was shocked, and he hurriedly flashed away from this lethal strike. Suddenly, Yang Yi appeared before him, and then Yang Yi drew his sword. The black-robed man's expression changed drastically, and he used the blood-red shield again, while his profound energy surged madly into it. The sword descended. Bang! An explosion resounded, and the shield exploded apart while the black-robed man was blasted away. Meanwhile, a ray of light suddenly shot out of the sword gourd. Bang! The black-robed man was blasted away, and an arm of his vanished. He just stopped himself in midair when a sword immediately arrived before his forehead. The black-robed man cracked a smile. Amazing, truly amazing. I didn't expect you to have grown so strong. Even a two-world realm expert is nothing before you. We underestimated you. We really underestimated you. Xianxia walked over to him. Which power are you from? The man grinned. Why? Want to annihilate us? It's fine. Even if you don't go to them, they will come for you. Boom! As soon as he finished speaking, his body exploded apart, and then a shadow vanished into the sky. He'd fled with just his soul. The black-robed man knew he was no match for Xianxia, so he'd decisively chosen to abandon his body and flee with his soul in order to give himself a chance at survival. However, how could Xianxia possibly allow that to happen? At the instant the black-robed man's soul escaped, the sword gourd on Xianxia's waist shook, and then a ray of light vanished into the sky. A shrill cry resounded from far away. Swoosh! A ray of light entered into the sword gourd. Xianxia put his sword away and looked at Yi Tianqing and Li Yuan. Sorry for causing trouble for you. Yi Tianqing laughed bitterly. Young brother Yang, is Xiaotian all right? Xianxia shook his head. She's fine. He glanced at the sky and continued. I didn't expect them to even refuse to spare all of you. I'm sorry. If this happens again, just tell them where I am. Yi Tianqing was slightly hesitant. But Xianxia smiled. It's fine. They aren't existences all of you can deal with. So, just let them come to me. Yi Tianqing hesitated for a moment and nodded. Just as Xianxia had said, those powers that had enmity with Xianxia weren't existences that their sects could offend. Xianxia brought Yi Xiaotian out of the primordial pagoda, and her arms were healed. She gazed at him. He was going to kill us just because we knew you? Xianxia spoke softly. Sorry, it really was his fault because he'd brought calamity to them. She shook her head slightly. It's not your fault. It's theirs. They just do as they wish. The lives of the weak are nothing to them. She suddenly looked up at Xianxia and continued. In the future, I'll target and kill people like them. Xianxia was stunned speechless. Her eyes were filled with determination. Xianxia glanced at her and smiled. Then work hard. After all, that guy was very strong. She nodded. I'll work hard. I definitely will. Xianxia smiled. Once you have sufficient strength, don't forget to visit me in Eternal Border. He gazed at Yi Tianqing and Li Yuan, and then he flicked a talisman over to them. If someone comes here again, then feel free to tell them where I am. If they still insist on acting against you, then crush this talisman, and I'll get here as soon as possible. Actually, he was aware that he was being followed, and the only reason he hadn't killed that person was because he couldn't be bothered to. Moreover, he was well aware that if he killed one, another would come. If that continued, it would just be a waste of time. However, he noticed that person hadn't followed him when he left North Charge Sect. He knew that the expert following him may act against North Charge Sect, and so he immediately turned back. Sure enough, it had occurred. If he'd been just a little later, then the North Charge Sect would probably cease to exist. A protection talisman. Yi Tianqing naturally didn't refuse it, and he took it and said, Thank you. Xianxia nodded, and then he vanished into the sky. Yi Xiaotian looked up at the sky with slight envy. Father, he's so strong. He killed that guy with just 2 attacks. Oh right, that gourd wasn't bad. Father, get me one too. Yi Tianqing rolled his eyes. It wasn't bad? That was a divine treasure. It was impossible to get one even if he sold his entire sect. Not long after Xianxia left, an old man appeared here. Yi Tianqing and the others seemed like they were facing a formidable enemy when they saw him. The old man glanced at the surroundings. Where's the corpse? Yi Tianqing waved his right hand, and the black-robed man's corpse appeared before the old man. Yi Tianxing hadn't destroyed it. The old man scanned the corpse and asked, "How many attacks did it take him?" Yi Tianxing hesitated for a moment and said, "I think it was 3. 3 attacks." The old man closed his eyes slowly. A 2-world realm expert had been killed with just 3 attacks. Such strength surpassed his expectations. A short while passed before the old man asked, "Where is he going?" Yi Tianxing told the truth. "The divine martial sect. Xiao Shenwu." The old man frowned and looked at the sky. "Is Xiao Shenwu the founding ancestor of the divine martial sect?" Yi Tianxing confirmed. "Yes." The old man suddenly chuckled. "Interesting. According to my knowledge, Xiao Shenwu seems to be quite interested in that sprite progenitor too." The old man vanished on the spot. Yi Tianxing heaved a sigh of relief. Not every expert was fond of bullying the weak for fun. Around an hour later, Yang Yi descended to the ground, and a huge ancient city stood before him. Divine Martial City. Yang Yi looked up at the sky. "And Nanjing, where are you?" Yang Yi stood silently before the city for a short while, and then he restrained his thoughts and entered Divine Martial City. Divine Martial City. Divine Martial Continent could be described as a city where everyone cultivated in the martial Dao, and its attainments in the martial Dao was extremely advanced. Of course, it was still weaker than Eternal Border. After all, Eternal Border was where a myriad of worlds intersected, and the most advanced martial Dao in all the worlds was there. As for Divine Martial City, it could be said to be the center of the civilization of the martial Dao on Divine Martial Continent. It had the most advanced martial Dao on this continent. Once he entered the city, Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings and noticed that everyone here cultivated in the martial arts. Meanwhile, Snowy appeared on his shoulder. Yang Yi glanced at her, and she cracked a smile. Obviously, she'd gotten bored inside the pagoda and wanted to play outside. Yang Yi smiled and didn't make her go back inside. Yang Yi took Snowy further into the city. His destination was the Divine Martial Sect, and it was at the center of the city. All along the way, Snowy kept looking left and right. Unfortunately, nothing was to her liking. Suddenly, a woman appeared before Yang Yi. Yang Yi glanced at her. She was around the age of 20, seemed quite pretty, and had a sword on her waist. She glanced at Yang Yi and asked, "Is your surname Yang?" Yang Yi nodded. "It is." She spoke indifferently. "My young master wants to see you. Come with me." She turned around and walked away. Yang Yi rubbed his nose and was quite surprised. Someone wanted to see him? It was the first time he'd been to Divine Martial World. Suddenly, she turned around and gazed at Yang Yi. "I told you to come with me. Didn't you hear me?" Yang Yi restrained his thoughts and glanced at her. "Is this how your young master taught you to invite someone?" She frowned slightly. "What? Do you want me to kneel down and beg you?" Yang Yi shook his head. "How unreasonable!" He ignored her and walked off toward the city. Her gaze turned icy cold. Suddenly, another woman appeared before Yang Yi. She wore a green dress, and there was a sword by her waist as well. She bowed slightly to Yang Yi. "Young Master Yang, I'm left sword. When my young master found out you'd come here, we were sent especially to invite you to Cloud Residence." Yang Yi asked, "Your young master knows me?" She shook her head slightly. "I do not know. However, you should be able to find out once you get there." Yang Yi shook his head and smiled. "I have other matters to attend to, so I won't be going." He walked around her and just walked off into the distance. Suddenly, the woman from before appeared in front of Yang Yi. She gazed coldly at him. "So you plan to act insensibly?" Snowy blinked on Yang Yi's forehead, and then she clapped her paws together lightly. A ray of black light suddenly shot up into the air from the rear mountains of Void Mountain, and then it descended onto the ascension platform. It was Oxy with the primordial axe of creation in his grasp. Oxy looked up into the sky and was ready to attack at any moment. Outside the primordial pagoda, Yang Yi walked over to her and looked her in the eyes. "Move aside!" Her eyes narrowed slightly, and the sword by her waist started trembling. It was about to leave its sheath. Suddenly, Snowy waved her paw. and the sword on her waist immediately left its sheath and entered Snowy's grasp. Snowy shook her head as she gazed at it. It was actually a pseudo-divine treasure, but it was nothing to Snowy now. However, Snowy didn't plan to return it. She just waved her paw and sent it into the primordial pagoda. The woman was stunned, and then she exploded with rage. She pointed at Snowy and howled with fury. "Where is it?" Xianxia frowned. Meanwhile, Snowy blinked, and then her gaze descended onto the ring on the woman's finger. A moment later, she waved her paw, and the ring immediately struggled free of the woman and flew into Snowy's grasp. Snowy glanced at it, shook her head, and then threw it into the primordial pagoda with a face of disgust. At this moment, the woman in front of Xianxia was beyond furious. "You're courting death." As soon as she said that, she used her hand as a sword and pointed it at Xianxia from afar. Hiss! An ethereal sword stabbed at Xianxia's forehead. The sword was very fast, so fast that it surprised Xianxia a little. However, it was quite difficult to kill him with such speed. Moreover, while it was fast, its strength wasn't sufficient. It could be said that he could just use his physical strength to defend himself against it. However, Xianxia didn't do that. He tapped the tip of his right foot against the ground and vanished on the spot. A moment later, a hand grabbed the woman's throat. Her eyes opened wide, and they were filled with disbelief. This man who was around her age had actually been able to restrain her in just one move. Suddenly, Xianxia slammed her against the ground. Bang! The ground instantly cracked open, and her head sunk into the ground. Suddenly, a ray of sword energy assaulted Xianxia from behind. Left sword had attacked decisively when she saw Xianxia restrain the woman. Xianxia released the badly injured woman and slammed a punch forward. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then left sword was blasted away and was almost blasted out of the city. Countless gazes throughout the city were immediately attracted. Such formidable physical strength! Someone exclaimed with shock. It's probably at the World Lord realm. He's a monstrous genius to be able to cultivate his body to such an extent. At the edge of the city walls, Left Sword glanced at her right hand. It had cracked open, and it wasn't the only thing which had cracked open. There were countless cracks on her sword too. Such powerful physical strength. Left Sword looked up at Xianxia. "Young Master Yang, we have no ill intent. You don't." Xianxia grinned. "You two just tried to kill me, yet you say that you don't have ill intent?" Xianxia suddenly vanished on the spot once he finished speaking, and he was in front of Left Sword when he appeared again. The latter's pupils constricted, and she stabbed her sword forward. However, Xianxia grabbed onto it. He'd grabbed her sword with just his bare hands. Despair covered Left Sword's face. She knew that this man's strength wasn't something the two of them could rival. "Brother Yang, please show mercy." Suddenly, a weak voice came from the side. Xianxia looked over, and he saw a man walking over slowly in a white velvet robe. The man was extremely handsome. He had flawlessly exquisite features, a slender and tall figure, and was holding a white silk scarf. However, he seemed extremely frail. It was no man, it was clearly a woman dressed as a man. She walked over to him, but Xianxia was still holding onto Left Sword's sword. She grinned. "Young Master Yang, can you put it down?" Xianxia shook his head. "Give me an explanation. If you can't, I'll be taking the heads of these subordinates of yours." Left Sword's expression changed when she heard this. The woman grinned. "You came from Eternal Border in search of a person, and I may be able to help you with that." Xianxia released the sword and walked over to her. "How?" She smiled. "Let's go someplace else?" Xianxia replied, "All right." She glanced at the woman on the ground, shook her head, and then looked at Left Sword. The latter hurriedly knelt down. "I deserve death." The woman closed her eyes. "Your haughtiness is a problem, and it needs to be fixed." She turned around and left. Xianxia followed her. Xianxia glanced at her from behind, and he seemed quite vigilant. She felt dangerous to him. Dangerous. She could make him sense danger. After all, he wouldn't sense any danger when facing a two-world realm expert. A short while later, Xianxia followed her to a place called Cloud Residence. Cloud Residence was built on a cliff, and there were 3 bamboo houses here. When someone walked out of the bamboo house, one would be able to see the clouds. It was like a paradise for immortals. The woman sat cross-legged on a jade rock by the cliff, and there was a tea table set before her. On the table were 2 cups and some fruits. There were 2 women standing at the side. One of them was Left Sword, and the other woman was called Right Sword. The woman glanced at Snowy, who was on Xianxia's shoulder. "That's the sprite progenitor?" Xianxia glanced at her. "Not yet." She smiled, and she knocked the table lightly with her right hand. A short moment later, a fiery red fruit appeared on the table. As soon as it appeared, a refreshing fragrance arose here, and it refreshed the soul, gladdened the heart, and made one's entire body feel extremely comfortable. The eyes of both women were filled with shock when they saw the fruit. The mysterious spirit fruit. It was a strange fruit that could improve the cultivation and bloodline. It was a divine treasure. Not only was it very useful to people, it was even more useful to demons. It could be said that even the divine martial sect couldn't produce many fruits like this. She offered it to Snowy and smiled. "It's for you." Left Sword and Right Sword's chins almost hit the ground from shock. "She's giving it to that little fellow?" Left Sword and Right Sword gazed at Snowy. They really wanted to ask what made the little fellow so special to receive that fruit. After all, a 2-world realm demon had been willing to serve their master for 20 years in order to obtain that fruit. However, their master hadn't agreed to it. Yet now she was willingly giving it away. Snowy touched the fruit, and then she shook her head. After that, she pushed it to the woman. "Huh!" The woman gazed at Xianxia. Obviously, she didn't understand what Snowy meant. Xianxia hesitated for a moment and translated. "She's saying that it's trash." The woman's face froze. "Nonsense." Suddenly, Right Sword spoke angrily. "That's a divine fruit." "A divine fruit? Do you know what that is?" "It's a divine fruit comparable to a divine treasure. That pet of yours doesn't recognize such a treasure and actually calls it trash." How laughable. She seemed to have thought of something at this point, and she glanced at Xianxia with fear while taking 2 steps back. Snowy gazed at Xianxia and pointed at the fruit before waving her paws. Xianxia nodded. "Don't explain. I understand. It isn't the fruit that's not good enough. It's she who's too poor. Poverty limits her imagination. She isn't on the same level as you." Snowy blinked. The mysterious spirit fruit. Actually, as far as Xianxia was concerned, the fruit on the table wasn't bad, and even Oxy's eyes were filled with desire within the primordial pagoda. However, he was very well aware that it was nothing to Snowy. After all, she had another fruit, the fruit from the old man with a bamboo chest. That was a true divine treasure. Right Sword wanted to say more, but the woman in front of Xianxia suddenly glanced at her, and Right Sword grunted coldly, "Young master, he's insulting you and that divine treasure." The woman ignored her and gazed at Xianxia with a smile. "Brother Yang, what do you think of them?" Xianxia glanced at them and said, "Their natural talent is very good, but their character is bad, and their mentality is worse." Very good natural talent. Actually, they were only around the age of 20, but they were at the true Dao realm. Besides that, their sword intent was at the peak of the progenitor realm. They were only a step away from true Dao realm sword intent. Such attainments at their age were extremely terrifying. The woman in front of Xianxia chuckled when she heard Xianxia, but it only took a moment for her to start coughing violently instead. The 2 women hurriedly walked over to her, and then Left Sword passed a white pearl to her. The woman shook her head slightly, but Left Sword got anxious and hurriedly said, "Young master, just eat it." She smiled and didn't insist when she saw the anxiety on the 2 women's faces. She swallowed the white pearl. After that, she gazed at Xianxia. "Young Master Yang, I raised these maidservants of mine. They may be my maidservants, but they are like loved ones to me. But because of me and their own natural talent, it was unavoidable that they become slightly proud and haughty." She gazed at the 2 women who'd lowered their heads. "What did I say when I asked you to invite young Master Yang here?" Right sword hesitated for a moment and said, "To be respectful, and don't insist if young Master Yang refuses." She asked, "But what did both of you do?" They fell silent. The woman gazed at Yang Yi and grinned. "If you knew he was so strong, would you still do the same?" "You wouldn't, because the strong should be respected, but should the weak not be respected too? Remember this lesson today, and you can leave if you act with an air of superiority over others again." Their faces instantly turned ghastly pale, and they immediately knelt on the ground and lowered their heads as they begged for mercy. "Stand!" The woman waved her hand lightly, and a soft gust of wind helped them up. "Apologize to young Master Yang." They didn't hesitate to walk over to Xianxia's side and bow slightly. "Young Master Yang, we were wrong. Please forgive us." Yang Yi glanced at them, and they lowered their heads and dared not meet his gaze. Yang Yi shook his head and smiled before looking at the woman before him. "Shall we get down to business?" She smiled. "Of course. Right. Allow me to introduce myself. Aling." Aling. It was quite a different name, but Yang Yi didn't have the mood to think too much about it. He just spoke frankly. "Miss Aling, you said that you can help me locate my friend. Is that true?" She grinned. "Of course." Yang Yi asked, "What do you want in return?" Aling took a sip from her teacup and said, "I'm sure you've noticed the issues I have with my body. Due to certain reasons, I've been sick for many years, and it's impossible to treat it no matter how I try. I came to Eternal Border in hopes of obtaining a divine treasure that can treat my illness, but my search was in vain. However, right when I was about to leave, I received news about you." Yang Yi said, "The primordial violet energy." She grinned. "Exactly. It's one of the 10 great spirit energies, and it can be described as a divine energy of healing. If I have its help, it might be possible to treat my illness." Yang Yi took a gulp of his tea and said, "Find in Nanjing and I'll treat you." She smiled. "All right." She withdrew a map and placed it before Yang Yi. "This is a map of divine martial continent, and the places circled in red are the forbidden areas of this continent." She pointed at 2 of the red circles and continued, "If I'm not wrong, she's very likely to be in one of these places." Yang Yi asked, "Why?" She smiled. "These are the only 2 places on divine martial continent that aren't familiar to me. To be honest, I sent people to search for a Nanjing before you even arrived. Unfortunately, there's no sign of her anywhere else." Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and said, "Are you sure she's not anywhere else?" Aling smiled. "I'm certain." Yang Yi gazed at the map. The places she was pointing at were the Martial Tomb and Southern Desolate Lands. Yang Yi gazed at her and asked, "What are these places?" She replied softly, "They can be considered as the most mysterious places on divine martial continent, especially the Martial Tomb. Only Xiao Xinwu has been able to come out alive from that place. As for the Southern Desolate Lands, while I haven't been there, I do know a little about it. There's a mysterious expert there. As for how strong that expert is or who that expert is, I do not know. The Martial Tomb." Yang Yi gazed at the Martial Tomb first. "Miss Aling, why is it called the Martial Tomb?" Aling smiled. "According to legend, an extremely formidable expert in the martial Tao is buried there. However, even I don't know the truth of that legend." Yang Yi nodded. "I'll go have a look then." Left sword and right sword couldn't help but gaze at Yang Yi. "Go to the Martial Tomb? It's the most dangerous place on divine martial continent." Aling suddenly said, "Young Master Yang, do you need help with anything?" Yang Yi thought for a moment and replied, "Please continue investigating her whereabouts, and please let me know if you find anything." Aling smiled. "All right." Yang Yi nodded, and then took Snowy in his arms and was about to leave. However, Snowy suddenly gazed at right sword, and then she flew over to right sword. Snowy lifted her palm, and an ethereal axe appeared in her grasp. Snowy's going to attack her? Yang Yi was stunned, but it didn't take long for him to chuckle. This little fellow. Snowy didn't attack. She waved the primordial axe of creation at right sword, and then put it aside. Right sword was stunned at the sight of the axe. A divine treasure. It was actually a divine treasure. However, that wasn't the end of it. Snowy flipped her paw, and an ethereal pagoda appeared there. The primordial pagoda. Another divine treasure. Right Sword was utterly stunned. But that still wasn't the end of it. Snowy sped up, and it didn't take long for the sword gourd, seal of suppression, myriad world diagram, and true energy mirror to appear before Right Sword. Divine treasures. All of them were divine treasures. True divine treasures. Right Sword was beyond stunned, and it was like she'd seen a ghost. Right Sword wasn't the only one who was stunned. Aling was quite stunned too, because there were just too many divine treasures there. It made her wonder when they had become so common. Meanwhile, Snowy cracked a smile at Right Sword and put the treasures away. She flew over to Xianxia's shoulder, and Yang Yi rubbed her head. "You little fellow!" He transformed into a ray of light and vanished into the sky. Right Sword took a long time to finally recover from her shock, and she gazed at Aling. "Young master. She has so many divine treasures, even more than the divine martial sect. As the #1 sect of this continent, it actually couldn't compare in wealth to that white little fellow. Divine treasures." Right Sword was extremely shocked. It was the first time she'd seen so many of them. Aling shook her head and smiled. "You don't know her true identity. If you did, your jaw would hit the ground. Compared to those divine treasures, she's the true rare existence. Even 10,000 divine treasures can't compare to her." Right Sword was about to ask about it when Aling suddenly said, "Since you're here, show yourself." A moment of silence ensued, and then an old man appeared nearby. The old man glanced at her and was about to speak when she suddenly said, "You're here for Yang Yi?" The old man replied, "Yes." Aling nodded. "I've made a deal with him, that's all. I'm not interested in interfering in the enmity between him and the powers of eternal border, and I have no intent to fight for that sprite progenitor." The old man asked, "What deal have you made with him?" She glanced at him. "You don't need to know." The old man's eyes narrowed slightly while a powerful wave of pressure appeared here. Suddenly, Aling slapped her palm lightly against the table. In an instant, a jade cup on the table transformed into a ray of light that shot at the old man. Bang! An explosion resounded, and the old man was blasted far away. Once he stopped himself, he looked down at his palm, and there was a bloody hole there. It was a very deep hole that went through his arm. The old man clenched his right fist slowly and looked up at her with deep fear in his eyes. Meanwhile, she stood up slowly and walked out of the bamboo house. "Allow me to repeat myself. I have no intention of interfering in Xianxia's business with the powers of eternal border. However, all of you should not interfere in my business with him too. Don't disturb him until our business is concluded. Otherwise, anyone from your powers who dares to step foot into divine martial continent won't see another sunrise." The old man asked, "Is that a threat?" She stopped and grinned. "It is a threat." She coughed lightly. "Send him off." As soon as she gave the order, 2 robust middle-aged men appeared behind the old man. Both were 2 world realm experts. The old man's expression changed at this moment. The 2 middle-aged men behind the old man had locked onto him with their divine senses. Obviously, they would attack if he refused. The old man glanced at the bamboo house and left. In the bamboo house, Aling sat cross-legged on the bamboo bed, and Right Sword and Left Sword weren't too far away ahead of her. Aling spoke softly. "Tell them to continue searching, and ask the other sects and hidden powers of the continent to help as well. Tell them I asked them to." Right Sword hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, Xianxia's strength may be not bad, but he's absolutely not a match for you. Since he has primordial violet energy, you can just ask him to hand it over. Why waste so much time?" Aling chuckled. "He's no ordinary person. Do you think someone who can make all the powers of eternal border pursue him is someone who's easy to bully?" Eternal border. They were shocked. They naturally knew of eternal border. It was a place that all the experts of divine martial continent wished to go to. Left Sword, who'd been silent until now, suddenly asked, "Young master, why do they wish to kill him?" Aling grinned. Because of that white little fellow. That pet. Right Sword was puzzled. Besides being a little cute, there's nothing special about her. Aling chuckled, but it didn't take long for her to cough violently. The two women hurriedly offered her medicine, but she waved her hand and said, "She's not just a little cute. If she truly puts on a show of might in the future, she can destroy divine martial continent in an instant. So, it's not only because he isn't an ordinary person, it's also because that little fellow isn't ordinary either. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble in the future, it's best to work with him." Right Sword wanted to inquire further, but Aling waved her hand. "Go do what I asked." They didn't say another word and just bowed slightly to her before leaving. After he left Cloud Residence with Snowy, Xianxia headed straight for the martial tomb. In the clouds, Snowy sat on Xianxia's shoulder while lightly rubbing her head against his face. Xianxia glanced at her, shook his head, and smiled. She was growing more and more intelligent. Earlier, Right Sword had spoken about her being unable to recognize the value of that fruit, and she'd actually remembered that, giving rise to what had happened before they left. She was a petty little fellow. Xianxia looked up at the sky, and there was a trace of worry in his eyes. He knew Nanjing's character well. If she could contact him, she would definitely do so. So what exactly was she doing? Was she unable to contact him? Or was she too busy to contact him? Xianxia shook his head, restrained his thoughts, and sped up. He shot forward swiftly on his sword, and he stopped around 2 hours later. He entered a boundless mountain range, and it was like entering a boundless ocean. Xianxia wanted to continue flying on his sword, but there was an invisible force above the mountain range, and it stopped him from doing so. Of course, he could fly by force, but he wasn't that overbearing. Snowy was looking left and right from his shoulder. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Xianxia summoned the primal true dragon. Its dragon pressure could deter many demons in the mountain range. Sure enough, it worked very well, and Xianxia didn't even sense a mosquito nearby all along the way. After traveling for almost 2 hours through the mountain range, Xianxia finally stopped, and there was a tombstone before him. There were 2 characters on it. The martial tomb. Xianxia walked over to it. It wasn't huge, and there was nothing special about it. However, he could sense a faint fluctuation of energy from it. Xianxia glanced at Snowy, and she flew over to it and patted it lightly. The tombstone didn't move at all, so she gazed at Xianxia. Xianxia shrugged to display that he didn't know anything. She thought for a moment, and then she withdrew the ethereal axe and placed it against the tombstone. If being nice didn't work, then force it is. She'd learned this technique from Xianxia some time back, and it was really useful. The tombstone shuddered, and then a wave of fluctuations came from within it. Snowy blinked, and then she looked up at Xianxia and waved her paws. She was telling him that the tombstone was asking what they wanted. What they wanted. Xianxia had quite a weird expression on his face because the tombstone was really alive. Xianxia hesitated for a moment and said, "Ask it if it's willing to go with us." Snowy looked down at the tombstone and patted it lightly before pointing at herself. Obviously, she was asking if it was willing to go with her. Meanwhile, she seemed to have thought of something, and she blew lightly. In an instant, a strand of extremely pure spirit energy surged into the tombstone, and it shook violently in response. The tombstone fell silent for a long time, and then a wave of fluctuations came from it. Snowy looked up at Xianxia and cracked a smile before patting the tombstone. In an instant, it moved over to Xianxia. Xianxia smiled when he witnessed this. It was willing to go with them. It had willingly chosen to leave with Xianxia and Snowy. Xianxia placed his hand on it, and it felt icy cold to the touch. He grabbed it with his right hand and was about to lift it, yet he noticed to his shock that he was actually incapable of doing so. At this moment, a solemn expression instantly covered his face. It was so heavy. Xianxia fell silent for a short while, and then he grabbed it between his arms and started to exert force. Not only did he use his profound energy, he used his profound primal energy too. The tombstone gradually started to move. At the same time, it started to leave the ground, and as soon as it left the ground, Xianxia's face flushed red. Moreover, the veins on his arms bulged like little snakes. It was a shocking sight. 3 breaths of time later, Xiangyi released it. The tombstone crashed to the ground. Thud! The ground shook violently, and countless mountains in the surroundings shook violently as well. It was like someone had slammed a heavy blow against them. A treasure. Xiangyi glanced at his hands, and they were completely red. It was because he'd overexerted himself. He gazed at the tombstone again, and there was a wisp of excitement in his eyes. He knew it wasn't ordinary. Xiangyi seemed to have thought of something and gazed at Snowy. Ask if it belongs to someone else. Even though he wanted such a treasure, he had his principles. If it belonged to someone, then he wouldn't take it even if it was willing to go with him. He could be shameless against his enemies, but he wouldn't do that under normal circumstances. Snowy blinked and gazed at it, and then she waved her paws swiftly. A short while later, she gazed at Xiangyi and started to convey what the tombstone had told her. It did. An old man had placed it here in the past. However, the old man was gone. It had been many, many years since it had been placed here, and the old man had never returned. So, it had no owner now. Xiangyi smiled and was just about to put it away when Arya appeared by his side. Xiangyi and Snowy gazed at her, and she gazed at the tombstone instead. She walked over to it, glanced at it, and then patted it lightly. Big brother Yang, I want this thing. Xiangyi was stunned. Snowy blinked and gazed at Xiangyi. She didn't mind because no matter who got it, it would return to her if she wanted it. Xiangyi hesitated for a moment and said, Arya, this thing is really heavy. Heavy. Arya blinked, looked down at it, and then grabbed it at the corner. After that, Xiangyi watched with astonishment as she lifted it with one hand. Xiangyi was stunned speechless. Arya twirled it around, and then gazed at him. Big brother Yang, it isn't that heavy. Xiangyi smiled embarrassedly. Yes, it isn't. Since you like it, it's yours. She cracked a smile. Thank you, Arya. Meanwhile, Xiangyi suddenly asked, Why do you want this thing? She patted it and said, Oxy has a weapon now and I want one too. Moreover, it gives me a special feeling like I've seen it before. You've seen it. Xiangyi frowned. What do you mean? She shook her head. I don't know either. Xiangyi was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, Snowy flew over to Arya and placed her paw on Arya's head. There were 2 small pitch-black horns there. Horns. Xiangyi gazed at those horns too and asked, Arya, what are those? She shook her head. I don't know. Xiangyi felt speechless because she knew nothing. Meanwhile, Arya patted the tombstone and smiled. Not bad. Not bad indeed. I'm gonna spar with Oxy. Let's see if his axe or my rock is stronger. She grabbed the tombstone and entered the primordial pagoda. Spar with Oxy. Actually, Oxy was against it. Unfortunately, Oxy couldn't refuse. Xiangyi ignored them. He would have to dissuade Arya if she went for the primal true dragon, because they really didn't get along. So, if she went to spar with it, she may really kill it. However, he wasn't worried if she was sparring with Oxy because Oxy had some status in her heart. Xiangyi took Snowy in his arms and walked toward the depths of the mountain range. But he hadn't even gone far before a wave of invisible energy pressed down upon him. At the same time, a voice came from deep within the mountain range. You even took my tombstone. You're terrible. That little girl from before. How inconceivable she actually possesses that bloodline. This little fellow too. Isn't this a sprite progenitor? Your bloodline. TSK, you were actually able to reverse your bloodline. Interesting. Xiangyi was stunned. Reversed bloodline? Xiangyi frowned. He glanced ahead and walked over with Snowy in his arms. It didn't take long for Xiangyi to stop because a white-robed old man had appeared there. The old man had his hands behind his back. His body was slightly hunched, and his beard was so long it almost reached his chest. At this moment, the old man was staring at Snowy. Xiangyi glanced at the old man, walked over and cupped his fist. Sorry for disturbing you, senior. The old man grinned. It really is a sprite progenitor. He gazed at Yang Yi. The world is truly miraculous. I didn't expect to see a sprite progenitor in this world. Yang Yi was puzzled. Why can't there be a sprite progenitor in this world? The old man smiled. That is a good question. True, nothing is absolute. No sprite progenitor has appeared here in the past. But it doesn't mean that it won't happen in the future. There's a first time for everything. Yang Yi rubbed Snowy's head. As far as I'm concerned, she's just Snowy and not a sprite progenitor. The old man smiled. But the world is not of the same mind. Yang Yi smiled. What does that have to do with me? The old man gazed at Yang Yi for a long time and said, taking a different path is very difficult. Yang Yi grinned. It's a path I chose. So no matter how difficult, I'll finish it, even if I must do so on my knees. The old man sighed softly, hesitated for a moment and said, Junior, let me ask you a question. Answer me truthfully. If the world you reside in suffers a calamity one day, will you step forward? Yang Yi fell silent. The old man asked, Is it very difficult to answer? Yang Yi shook his head. Senior, I'm a selfish person. The old man smiled. Who isn't selfish in this world? I asked because of your sword Dao. You're not a heartless and disloyal person. Otherwise, this sprite progenitor wouldn't choose to stay with you, and your sword Dao would never have been able to progress until this point. He glanced at Snowy and continued. That tombstone was forged by a good friend of mine with a precious treasure. It's a treasure he used a chaotic divine treasure and almost 100 years to refine. Yang Yi felt quite embarrassed, but he was not a shameless person, so he was ready to return it. However, the old man suddenly said, Now, I'm giving it to you. Huh? Yang Yi gazed at the old man with bewilderment in his eyes. The old man smiled. You didn't hear me wrongly. I'm giving it to you. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and asked, Why? The old man smiled. I think fate brought us together. Is that a good enough answer for you? Yang Yi shook his head to display that he didn't believe it. The old man thought for a moment and said, No one in this world isn't selfish, but at most times, people are selfless too. Your emotions are true, kind, and extreme. But in the end, they are selfish emotions. They can only be considered as minor emotions. Do you know why the sprite progenitor is so powerful and loved by all things? Because their emotions are great emotions. Their hearts love all things, and so all things naturally love them. Yang Yi smiled. Senior, I can't be a hero. The old man thought for a moment and said, Don't you want your sword Dao to grow stronger? Yang Yi smiled. Yes, I really want that. But I think that nothing in this world can be had both ways, and I don't seek perfection either. As far as I'm concerned, all that matters is that I have a clear conscience. Regardless of whether it's to many loved ones, friends, or anyone else, a clear conscience is all that matters. As for the great emotions you spoke of, I think it does make a huge amount of sense. Unfortunately, it's not suitable for me, because I don't want to be someone I do not want to be. He hesitated for a moment and continued. A friend of mine once said that I should never grow stronger for the sake of growing stronger. I think that makes a lot of sense. What do you think? A clear conscience. The old man smiled. Don't grow stronger for the sake of growing stronger. Your friend isn't ordinary at all. Yang Yi smiled and remained silent. The old man grinned. I never expected that I would be discussing the Tao with someone as young as you. Yang Yi grinned. I think you want to say that you never expected to discuss it with someone as weak as me, right? The old man smiled. We're from different generations. I dare not guarantee I would be able to suppress you at your age, just like that little girl. Both of you are extraordinary geniuses. As they say, time gives birth to greater talents, and so they lead the way for years to come. Little girl. Yang Yi clenched his fists. Senior, what did she look like? The old man glanced at Yang Yi and waved his right hand. In an instant, a portrait condensed from spirit energy appeared before Yang Yi. A Nanjing. It was a Nanjing. Yang Yi suppressed his excitement and asked, Senior, where is she now? The old man asked, You came here to look for her? Yang Yi nodded. The old man said, She went somewhere else, the south. The south. The southern desolate lands. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and asked, Senior, the words Martial Tomb were written on that tombstone. Where does that name come from? The old man grinned. I once had a nickname, the Martial Ancestor. The Martial Ancestor. Yang Yi asked, Did she take you as her master? The old man shook his head. No, Yang Yi was puzzled. Why? The old man smiled. She chose someone else. Yang Yi asked, The person in the southern desolate lands? The old man nodded. Her obsession was great, and her natural talent is very good. If she was willing to become my disciple, I would naturally not refuse her. No one in this world is more suitable to be my successor than her. Unfortunately, she chose someone else. He glanced toward the south and continued, It's really quite a pity. After he found out about Nanjing's whereabouts, Yang Yi had no further intent to stay. However, he still had a question, and so he asked, Senior, you spoke about reversing the bloodline. What did you mean by that? Reversing the bloodline. The old man explained softly, When a person's strength arrives at a certain level, they can change their bloodline. This change is like the strength of a demon beast's bloodline. However, it's not easy to reverse your bloodline, and anyone capable of accomplishing that is no weakling. As for you, your bloodline is being changed. In other words, you've surpassed your ancestors, or it should be said that you've surpassed all your ancestors. You've advanced beyond the bloodline they've given you and possess your own bloodline now. As for what it is, you'll find out once it has fully formed in the future. Bloodline. Yang Yi spoke solemnly. Anyone can advance above their own bloodline by their own efforts? Even demons? The old man smiled. In theory, yes. However, it's very difficult. As for demons, it's even more difficult. Many great demons of the demon race are made by their bloodlines but destroyed by their bloodlines too. Very, very few demons are able to overcome the bloodline of their ancestors. But once they do succeed, they will rise to a new height. It's the same for humans. Now, you're slowly improving in all aspects, and the benefits are on the way. The strength of his bloodline. Yang Yi fell silent for a short while, and then he thought of a reason. It was his decision to suppress his cultivation. Was his decision to suppress his cultivation the reason that his bloodline had started to transform? Yang Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He asked, Senior, you spoke about Arya's bloodline as well. What bloodline is that? The bloodline of a great demon. Arya? The old man asked. That little girl who took my tombstone? Yang Yi nodded. The old man chuckled. She doesn't possess the bloodline of a great demon. Her bloodline is much better than that. Even the greatest demon in the world has to submit before her. Yang Yi was stunned. He was about to say something when the old man suddenly said, Don't ask about her background. You'll find out when the time comes. I refuse to tell you out of respect for her. She hasn't awakened completely right now. Once she does, it's her business whether she's willing to tell you. If I tell you now, she may get angry at me for interfering. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and nodded. He stopped asking about Arya's background and cupped his fist. Then I'll be taking my leave. That sword sheath of yours. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly asked, Can you let me have a look at it? The sword sheath. Yang Yi nodded and withdrew the sword sheath he'd obtained from the mysterious expert beneath the northern sword sect. He flicked it over to the old man. The old man gazed at it for a long time before he said, I presume you've met that person. As he spoke, he flicked the sheath back to Yang Yi. He's a very powerful sword cultivator, a very powerful one. During our era, he was a sword cultivator who countless admired. Even that old geezer Wu and I, who's never convinced of anyone's strength, was convinced of his strength. Do not bring shame to that sheath, and do not bring shame to its sword either. Farewell. As soon as he finished speaking, the old man vanished on the spot. Its sword. Yang Yi glanced at the sword sheath, fell silent for a short while, and then put it away and vanished into the distance. There were many questions in his heart. Who was the man beneath the northern sword sect? Who was this old man he'd just met? Who was the old man with the bamboo chest? Who were they? Which era were they from? Why did he feel smaller the stronger he became? Not long after Yang Yi left, an old man in black clothes arrived at the martial tomb. The old man was that same old man who'd been following Yang Yi. After he left Cloud Residence, he'd followed Yang Yi all the way here as he had to figure out everything about Yang Yi. Of course, it was mostly because the powers of Eternal Border were afraid that Yang Yi would obtain more fortuitous encounters. The old man at the peak of the two-world realm glanced at the surroundings, and then he looked into the distance. "Show yourself." Obviously, he was talking about the white-robed old man. Suddenly, a wave of pressure appeared here. Bang! The old man was suddenly slammed down to his knees, and it didn't stop there. His body was slammed flat on the ground while he couldn't move a muscle. No matter how he fought back, the black-robed old man couldn't move a muscle beneath the pressure. At this moment, he was beyond shocked. Just like that, this continued for around 4 hours before the energy gradually dispersed, and the old man immediately left. Once he fled the mountain range, the old man looked back at the martial tomb, and deep fear gradually appeared in his eyes, or it should be described as terror. Terror. It was terror he'd only experienced in the Eternal River. He didn't dare to stay longer and vanished on the spot. Once he left the martial tomb, Yang Yi immediately headed for the southern desolate lands. Finally, he had word on a Nanjing's whereabouts. Yang Yi shot swiftly through the sky on his sword. Everywhere he passed, the clouds were torn open, and it didn't take long for him to arrive at his destination. Desolation. It was an area of desolation where he could not see the sky through the grayness of the world. Yang Yi walked forward. He sensed no life in the area, and it was terrifyingly quiet too. There wasn't even a breeze here. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to see a cottage on a distant cliff. Yang Yi tapped his foot down and transformed into a ray of light that shot off in that direction. However, a wave of invisible energy immediately slammed down upon him. Bam! The ray of light shattered and Yang Yi was slammed to the ground. Yang Yi looked up at the cottage while his eyes narrowed slightly, and he remained silent for a short while before choosing to walk instead of flying to the cottage. When Yang Yi arrived below the cliff, something unexpected occurred. The ground cracked open, and a ray of sword energy surged out from below. It was swift, so swift that Yang Yi hadn't been able to sense its speed or presence. Hiss! The sword energy pierced through Yang Ye's stomach, causing him to be pushed back repeatedly until he was far away where he'd been a moment ago. Once he stopped himself, Yang Yi looked down at his stomach, and there was a very obvious hole there, pierced straight through until his back. The sword energy had pierced his entire body. Yang Yi looked up at the cliff, and then he continued forward. At the peak of the cliff, an old man in a linen robe sat cross-legged on a circular piece of wood. There was a round wooden table before him, and a geoboard was on it. Besides that, there was a white-robed old man in front of him. The white-robed old man was the martial ancestor from before. Their appearances were exactly the same. The martial ancestor was using the black pieces, and he put one down before he said, "Do you think he'll be able to get up here?" The old man in linen clothes remained indifferent. "So what if he can? So what if he can't?" The martial ancestor smiled. "He has very good potential." The other old man replied indifferently, "That girl is the best." Martial ancestor added, "The obsessed sword chose him." The other old man frowned slightly, stopped what he was doing, and looked down at Yang Yi. He remained silent for a long time, and then he said, "Let's see the ability of the person he chose." As he spoke, he pushed his left palm down lightly. Since he chose that fellow, the difficulty has to be doubled at least. As soon as his palm descended, another ray of light shot out from the ground. This time, it was at least 2 times faster than the last. Yang Yi wasn't even able to see it before his body was pierced again, and blood sprayed from his chest. At the same time, he was blasted back again. On the cliff, the martial ancestor chuckled. "That little girl may be his lover. Aren't you afraid that she'll be angry?" The old man in linen clothes replied indifferently, "The weak aren't worthy of her. I'm not against them being together, but I'm against her choosing a mediocre person. It's not wrong to be mediocre, but it's wrong for a mediocre person to be with someone outstanding. I don't want her to have a burden on her path of the martial Tao. The martial ancestor smiled. What if she becomes his burden instead? The old man chuckled with ridicule. Does anyone even have the right to do that? The white-robed old man shook his head and smiled without saying another word. Meanwhile, Xianxia stopped and didn't continue. Obviously, someone was stopping him, but that person didn't try to kill him. It represented that it was very likely to be a test. A test. The only way to head up there was to avoid the sword energy or destroy them. Xianxia fell silent for a short moment, and then he took a step forward again. But just 2 steps later, his expression changed drastically, and his sword left its sheath. However, at the exact same instant, a ray of sword energy slammed against him. Bang! Xianxia was blasted backward again. This time, he'd been blasted even further away. Once he stopped himself, Xianxia glanced at his chest before looking ahead. The sword energy was too fast, and it far surpassed his reaction speed. Xianxia fell silent for a long time, and once his injuries had almost fully healed, he walked forward once more. But he hadn't even taken 2 steps forward when the sword energy appeared again. Suddenly, a wave of mysterious energy appeared. The sword domain. As soon as it appeared, the sword energy slowed down. While it had slowed down, it was still very, very fast to Xianxia. However, at this moment, Xianxia had the ability to fight back now. His sword left its sheath. Hiss! 2 rays of sword energy collided and separated in an instant within his sword domain. Bang! Xianxia was blasted around 30 m back again, while a wisp of blood seeped out slowly from the corner of his mouth. The sword energy wasn't just fast. It was very strong too. The old men on the cliff looked down below. The sword domain. A long time passed before the old man in linen clothes spoke softly. There are a myriad of sword daos and sword domains. I wonder what his sword domain will develop into in the future. Martial ancestor nodded slightly. No matter what, it's still a rare sight. The old man in linen clothes spoke indifferently. Possessing something doesn't mean he knows how to use it, and knowing how to use something doesn't make it powerful. If he can't get up here, then I'll sever the karma between him and that little girl with my own hands. When he spoke up to this point, he paused for a moment and continued, The weak aren't worthy of her. Martial ancestor fell silent. Xianxia was about to move forward again when a voice resounded from the cliff. If you can't get here in 2 hours, then leave. 2 hours. There was a time limit now. Xianxia looked up and asked, Is she here? If a Nanjing wasn't here, he would turn around and leave. He didn't care about going up there at all. A moment of silence ensued, and then the voice replied, She is. Xianxia took a deep breath. This time he didn't hesitate. He stomped his right foot down and transformed into a ray of light that shot up the cliff. The old man in linen clothes laughed with ridicule. Trying to use force? You're brave. However, I wonder if your strength is on par with your temper. He waved his right hand. A ray of sword energy shot up at Xianxia from beneath the ground. A vicious glow flashed through Xianxia's eyes as he drew his sword. For swings. In an instant, Xianxia had swung his sword 4 times with the sword domain. His ultimate attack. As soon as the final swing descended, the ray of sword energy shattered, and then Xianxia appeared on the cliff. Xianxia's countenance was slightly pale, and his right hand had cracked open slightly. Luckily, it wasn't a big problem. As his strength in all aspects improved, swinging his sword 4 times with the sword domain wouldn't cripple him like it had in the past. However, it wasn't very easy as well. Just like this moment. Not to mention 4 swings, he couldn't even execute 2 swings right now. It was like he'd been completely exhausted. Xianxia let out a breath of air and walked to the 2 old men. His gaze descended onto martial ancestor, and the latter grinned at him while he quickly cupped his fist. Senior, you're here too. Martial ancestor smiled. I came to have some fun. Xianxia nodded and gazed at the other old man. Senior, she's a friend of mine and I'm here for her. I'd like to see her. Xianxia was very respectful to the old man because it was very likely that a Nanjing was learning here, and he respected anyone a Nanjing respected. The old man glanced at Yang Yi and said, "Sit." Yang Yi didn't refuse and sat at the side. Meanwhile, the old man in linen clothes said, "She isn't here right now, but you can wait for her here." Yang Yi asked, "Where is she?" The old man didn't say, but martial ancestor suddenly said, "The hell world in the outer dimensions." The hell world. Yang Yi was puzzled. "What is that place?" Martial ancestor smiled. "A special place." Yang Yi asked, "How is it special?" Martial ancestor smiled. "Geniuses are plentiful like dogs there. Kid, you may be unmatched in your realm of cultivation here, but you may not be able to survive a day over there." He gazed at the distant sky and continued, "Geniuses? There are countless universes in the world, and so geniuses are innumerable as well. However, the geniuses of all other worlds dim in comparison to the geniuses in Hell World." Yang Yi asked, "Can I go there?" He shook his head. "No." Yang Yi said, "I'm not afraid of death." Martial ancestor smiled. "It's not about that. We just aren't able to pay the price to send you to the core area of that place." He practically spent everything he had in order to send that little girl over there. Yang Yi seemed to have thought of something and withdrew the myriad world diagram, and then his gaze fell on a certain spot. The hell world. It actually had the hell world on it. The myriad world diagram. Suddenly, the old man in linen clothes said, "How did you obtain that?" Yang Yi gazed at the old man. "I obtained it from a senior." The old man asked, "That old man with a bamboo chest?" Yang Yi nodded. The old men in front of Yang Yi exchanged glances, and they saw shock in each other's eyes. The old man in linen clothes fell silent for a long time, and then he gazed at Yang Yi. Suddenly, his expression changed because Yang Ye's hand had descended onto the hell world on the diagram. As soon as Yang Ye's hand touched it, Yang Ye's face changed drastically while a voice resounded in his mind. "How dare you try to enter hell world without permission?" In an instant, a wave of invisible force pressed down upon Yang Yi, causing his body to crack open. Blood sprayed toward the surroundings. Yang Ye's mind almost shattered before the shout, and it was like he was about to be killed. Yang Yi was horrified and hurriedly fortified his mind. Moreover, the primordial pagoda helped to protect his soul as well. However, the energy still remained. The old man in linen clothes suddenly pushed his right palm down in Yang Ye's direction, causing Yang Yi to be frozen on the spot. A moment of silence ensued, and then a voice resounded, "Oh, it's Senior Wu and I." The old man replied indifferently, "It's just an insensible junior. It's fine." The voice resounded, and then the energy on Yang Yi instantly vanished completely. Once it vanished, Yang Ye's body felt lighter, but his countenance was ghastly pale. The old man called Wu and I glanced at Yang Yi and said, "That world isn't a place that just anyone can go to." Yang Yi cupped his fist to Wu and I and said, "Thank you for helping me, Senior." He couldn't help but laugh bitterly once he finished speaking. He'd really bitten off more than he could chew this time. At that instant earlier, the person who attacked him had been at an immeasurable distance away. However, that person could attack him through the teleportation passageway of the myriad world diagram. Moreover, that person had even been so terrifying. If it hadn't been for Wu and I, he would have been heavily injured even if he was able to avoid death. Wu and I glanced at the myriad world diagram before Yang Yi and said, "That diagram is more precious than you think. There are probably no more than 3 of them in this world. As for its true abilities, you'll discover them in the future." Yang Yi shook his head and smiled. "There are too many things in this world that are still beyond my reach." Wu and I replied indifferently, "The world is boundless." Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and asked, "Senior, the world is boundless. Then has anyone been to the edge of the universe or its end?" Wu and I glanced at Yang Yi and replied, "I don't know." Yang Yi felt speechless. Meanwhile, martial ancestor suddenly said, "That old man with the bamboo chest may know a little." Wu Ni's hand shuddered slightly as he lifted a go piece, but he didn't say anything. The old man with the bamboo chest. The image of the old man with a bamboo chest appeared in Yang Ye's mind again. The old man was extremely mysterious indeed, and just a few things the old man revealed were all divine treasures, and he could only imagine what kind of treasures resided within the bamboo chest. The bamboo chest. It was a regret for Snowy. Just thinking about how unhappy Snowy had been that day made Xianxia grin. He restrained his thoughts and gazed at Wu and I. "Senior, when will she be back?" Wu and I replied. "She'll be back when she thinks she has overcome herself. Of course, she may never come back." Xianxia asked, "It's dangerous, right?" Wu and I nodded. Xianxia didn't say anything else because he believed in her. Because he had to wait for her. Xianxia settled down on the cliff. Wu and I paid no attention to him either. After all, he'd received Wu Ni's acknowledgement. As far as an expert like Wu and I was concerned, he would absolutely not allow his disciple to be with someone mediocre, but he was very well aware it was very beneficial to know even more experts on the path of cultivation. Friends. Everyone needed friends. Xianxia was no weakling. Since Xianxia wasn't mediocre, he naturally wouldn't object to their relationship. Xianxia just cultivated every day. He cultivated like a madman. If he encountered anything he didn't understand while cultivating, he would seek guidance from the old man, Wu and I. In the beginning, the old man really wasn't interested, but after Xianxia constantly disturbed him for answers, Wu and I provided Xianxia with guidance from time to time. Xianxia undoubtedly gained tremendously during this period. At the peak of the cliff, Xianxia stood by its side while the sword gourd hung by his waist. During this time, he'd been constantly training with the sword gourd. Now, he could use it to instantly kill a limit-breaker realm expert who was 500 kilometers away, but it only worked on one-world realm experts. It wasn't fast or strong enough for two-world realm experts. He had to improve his speed and strength to his current limits. At the edge of the cliff, Xianxia closed his eyes and focused in a meditative state. Meanwhile, Snowy appeared on Xianxia's shoulder. She'd been in deep sleep throughout this time, and she'd finally awakened now. When she noticed that Xianxia was cultivating, Snowy wrapped her claws around Xianxia's head and rubbed her head against his. After that, she didn't disturb him further. She leaped off his shoulder and went to the table where the two old men were playing Go. They usually took around a month to finish a single game. Snowy stood by the board and glanced at the white pieces before glancing at the black pieces. The old men were in a critical moment of their game, so while they knew a little fellow was by their side, they didn't pay the little fellow any attention. Snowy glanced for a while and felt that it was quite boring, and then she suddenly looked off into the distance. A moment later, she leaped down to the area behind the cliff, and a beast was lying deep within the grass over there. The beast looked like a qilin, and it had a very long horn on its head. Besides that, its limbs were very thick like iron pillars, and its tail was very, very long like a python. But the most striking feature was its claws. Every one of the claws on its limbs were exceedingly long and so sharp they could tear through anything. Snowy blinked as she gazed at it, and then she leaped over to it. The beast was clearly sleeping. Snowy seemed to have thought of something and suddenly withdrew a small piece of fruit. It was the fruit that the old man with a bamboo chest had given to her. She'd given half of the second fruit to Zir, and she had another half left. This was part of that half, but it was merely a tenth of that half. Once Snowy withdrew the piece of fruit, the beast before her immediately opened its eyes, and its gaze instantly fell on the fruit. However, just a moment later it gazed at Snowy, and then it was stunned. Snowy blinked, and then she cracked a smile at it before offering the fruit to the beast. It glanced at the fruit, gazed at Snowy, and then opened its mouth and started communicating with Snowy. Many beasts could speak the human tongue, but Snowy was no human. So, it didn't use the human tongue to speak to Snowy. It was asking if the fruit was really for it. Snowy nodded, and then she lifted the fruit toward the beast to indicate that it was true. The beast hesitated for a moment, and then it sucked the piece of fruit into its stomach. After that, it immediately stood up. Rumble. At the instant it stood up, the area started to tremble violently. Meanwhile, Wu and I stopped what he was doing and glanced over in Snowy's direction. "What's that little fellow doing?" Martial Ancestor chuckled casually. "What else?" "Playing." He placed a piece down as he spoke. Wu and I nodded. He didn't say another word and just put a piece down as well. After it swallowed the piece of fruit, it looked down at Snowy with a gaze filled with gratefulness. Meanwhile, Snowy flew up to it, and then she pointed at the horn on its head. She was asking if she could touch it. It hesitated for a moment and nodded. Snowy cracked a smile, and then she touched it lightly. Just like that, they could be considered to have become acquainted. A short while later, Snowy blinked, and then she started waving her paws swiftly. She was inviting the beast into the primordial pagoda to play with her, and she kept telling it how great it was within the pagoda. The beast glanced at the two old men in the distance and was quite hesitant. However, Snowy grabbed it by the horn and pulled it in Xianxia's direction. When it noticed that both the old men didn't object to this, it just allowed Snowy to pull it away. It didn't take long for Snowy to pull it into the primordial pagoda. In the primordial pagoda, the beast sized up the surroundings while Snowy summoned Oxy, the primal true dragon, and the primal vicious tiger over. The beast's eyes instantly narrowed slightly when it saw these demons, and its eyes were filled with vigilance and warning. Hostility. It was especially so when the beast saw the primal true dragon. The hostility in its eyes grew. It was hostility born from natural vigilance. The primal dragon glanced at the beast and moved its gaze away. Besides Snowy and that unreasonable little girl, Arya, the primal true dragon feared no one within this world. Actually, if it wasn't for the fact that Oxy had been constantly telling it to keep a low profile, it would have attacked the beast by now. When had the dragons ever feared anyone? Right, Snowy and Arya were exceptions. Snowy had clearly noticed the atmosphere here. So, she mediated by making all of them shake their paws to display that they were friends from now on. Oxy was the first to join in support. He walked over to the beast, nodded slightly to it as a form of greeting, and then he went behind Snowy. While Oxy's cultivation was low, the beast noticed the axe on Oxy's back, so it had quite a solemn expression on its face. It hesitated for a moment and nodded to Oxy. The primal vicious tiger gave Snowy face as well. It nodded to the beast, and the beast nodded slightly in response. Only the primal true dragon remained. Snowy gazed at the dragon, and it felt quite helpless. It had to give Snowy face or it would become the common enemy of everyone here. The primal true dragon glanced at the beast and nodded as a form of greeting. Since the primal true dragon had displayed amiability, the beast naturally discarded its hostility and nodded slightly. After all, the primal true dragon wasn't any lower in status to it. Snowy! Suddenly, Arya's voice resounded. The primal true dragon shuddered and vanished on the spot. Now that Arya had obtained that tombstone, she'd become beyond terrifying. Snowy turned around, and she saw Arya walking in her direction while licking a tonghulu. As soon as it saw Arya, the beast's expression instantly changed, and its hairs stood on end as if it was facing a powerful enemy. Arya walked over to Snowy and lifted the tonghulu to her. The latter stretched out her tongue and licked it. However, Snowy felt that wasn't enough, so she took it from Arya and started licking it herself. Arya didn't mind. She just gazed at the beast, sized it up and said, "Is this a new recruit of yours? Not bad. You should be quite good at fighting." "Oh right. Snowy, can you tell Big Brother Yang that I'm very hungry? I'm really very hungry. Now, I even feel like eating Oxy." Cold sweat immediately surged out of Oxy. She even wanted to eat Oxy. Snowy blinked, and she felt that this problem was very serious. She glanced at Oxy, and the latter thought for a moment and moved closer to Snowy. Oxy felt slightly safer like this. Snowy patted Arya on the shoulder to console her, and then she left the primordial pagoda. She intended to report the matter to Xianxia because she felt that it was very serious. Outside the primordial pagoda, Xianxia stood at the peak of the cliff. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, and then a ray of sword energy appeared 500 kilometers away. A mountain was instantly sliced into half there. However, nothing happened to the mountain, and it didn't collapse. Because the sword had been too swift, it had been swift to the extreme. He'd improved. Xianxia grinned. His flying swords were a little faster than before. While it was just a little, it was a very rare improvement. Now, even increasing its speed and strength by a little was absolutely difficult. Yang Yi was about to continue training when Snowy appeared in front of him and started waving her claws quickly. Yang Yi frowned a short while later. He hesitated for a moment and summoned Arya. The latter cracked a smile. "Big brother Yang, is there food for me now?" Yang Yi was stunned. Once she appeared here, both the old men stopped playing and gazed at her. Yang Yi pulled Arya over to them and cupped his fist before he asked, "Seniors, she wants to eat demon beasts. What should I do?" Actually, he really didn't know what to do about her request. She was no human, so it was in her nature to eat demon beasts. Forcefully asking her to change that would be suppression of her nature, and that wouldn't work for long. Wu and I nodded slightly to Arya and said, "What should you do?" "Get her demon beasts, of course." Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Arya's eyes lit up instead because she felt they were quite sensible. Meanwhile, Wu and I added, "In the beginning, I felt that she shouldn't be with you, because it will suppress her nature. However, I think it may be a good thing. If she is allowed to just release her nature completely, then she would be a calamity for the demon race. Moreover, if she did that at her current level of strength, it would be a calamity for her too." Wu and I seemed to have thought of something, and then he hurriedly gazed at Snowy. "Little fellow, where's my Marshal Qilin?" Marshal Qilin. Snowy blinked to display that she didn't know. Wu and I glared at Snowy. "Don't feign ignorance. I'm talking about that demon beast who was playing with you." Snowy looked around, and no one knew what she was planning. Suddenly, Wu and I moved his hand lightly, and the Marshal Qilin within the primordial pagoda looked up before leaving the primordial pagoda and appearing outside. Wu and I seemed to visibly relax upon seeing the Marshal Qilin. He'd almost forgotten that Arya was with Yang Yi. Suddenly, Snowy pointed at the Marshal Qilin and pointed at herself to say that it belonged to her. Wu and I glanced at Snowy. "Little fellow, on what basis do you say that it's yours? Are you trying to be shameless?" Snowy pointed at it to say that it could make its own choice. After that, she withdrew another piece of fruit and displayed that the fruit would belong to the Marshal Qilin if it chose her. The Marshal Qilin became quite conflicted. As for Wu and I, he had quite a strange expression on his face. Meanwhile, Snowy blew lightly at the Marshal Qilin. In an instant, a strand of pure spirit energy surged into it, and then it shuddered and seemed to feel extreme comfort. Sprite Ascension. Marshal Ancestor and Wu and I exchanged glances, fell silent for a moment, and then Marshal Ancestor said, "Staying with her is better than staying with us. Moreover, the Marshal Qilin chose that little girl, and staying with this little fellow is no different than staying with that little girl, right?" Wu and I fell silent for a long time, and then he gazed at the Marshal Qilin. "The person you chose will be with them in the future, so you'll see her if you stay with them." The Marshal Qilin was delighted. It lowered itself before Wu and I, and a short while passed before it stood up again and went over to Snowy's side. Snowy grinned and passed the fruit to the Marshal Qilin. It didn't hesitate to consume the fruit. Meanwhile, Wu and I suddenly asked, "That fruit was a gift from the old man with the bamboo chest too, right?" Yang Yi nodded. "Senior, what is that fruit?" Wu and I replied indifferently, "The chaotic origin fruit. It has practically gone extinct. Besides that old man, no one has any. It's extremely helpful to demon beasts and sprites. Can improve their bloodlines. While it only improves their bloodlines and doesn't change it, it's still extremely amazing. Once it is improved, and if they work hard, it's very likely that they'll be able to change their own bloodlines. In other words, they'll be able to surpass their current bloodlines. In short, it can help them surpass their own bloodlines, so it's ranked second among all precious fruits." Suddenly, Snowy raised one of her claws to ask what the first was. Wu and I glanced at Snowy. "You'll find out in the future." Snowy was at a loss for words. Just like that, Snowy's tricks had gotten Yang Yi another demon, the Marshal Qilin. It was an infant as well, and it was at the two-world realm. It was a mount that Wu and I had specially found for a Nanjing. However, Yang Yi treated it as his own. After all, it was a Nanjing's mount. Meanwhile, Wu and I glanced at Yang Yi and said, "Your flying sword from before is barely sufficient for you right now. However, it can be faster and stronger." Yang Yi was delighted and hurriedly said, "Senior, please provide me with guidance." Wu and I replied indifferently, "The sword domain! The sword domain!" Yang Yi frowned. A short while later, a smile curled up on his lips. "Thank you." He shot over to the clouds once he finished speaking. In the clouds, Yang Yi closed his eyes. In an instant, his figure turned ethereal. The sword domain. A moment later, the sword gourd shook violently by his waist, and then a ray of sword energy soundlessly appeared 500 kilometers away. It was swift. Yang Ye's eyes were filled with excitement. It was almost 30% faster than anything he'd achieved before this. The sword domain. If he used the sword domain with it, the flying swords from the sword gourd would undergo a qualitative transformation in speed and strength. Of course, it exhausted much more energy as well, but it was worth it. Presently, he could kill a two-world realm expert 500 kilometers away with just a thought. Yang Yi trained for a few more days, and then he left the cliff and went to Divine Martial City. Cloud Residence. He naturally hadn't forgotten about his deal with the woman. She'd provided him information to locate a Nanjing, and in return, he should do his part and heal her. Cloud Residence. Right sword and left sword greeted Yang Yi. Right sword bowed slightly to Yang Yi. "Young Master Yang, please wait a moment. She'll be here in a moment." Yang Yi nodded and sat at the side. Left sword frowned when she saw where Yang Yi was sitting, and she was about to say something but right sword stopped her. She'd realized that the person before her wasn't someone who was easy to deal with, so it was best not to offend him. Snowy glanced at them from Yang Ye's shoulder, and then she withdrew a Tonghulu and started licking it. Yang Yi didn't wait for a long time. Just a short while later, a middle-aged man walked out of the bamboo house. Right sword and left sword bowed slightly to him, and the middle-aged man nodded without saying anything. Right when he was about to leave, he suddenly gazed at Yang Yi. He was slightly stunned when he saw Yang Yi, and then he hesitated for a moment and asked, "Are you Yang Yi?" Yang Yi gazed at him. "And who are you?" The middle-aged man grinned when he saw Yang Yi admit it, and he cupped his fist. "I'm the master of the Divine Martial Sect. I didn't expect to see you here. If you're free, please visit my sect and enjoy our hospitality." The Divine Martial Sect's master. Yang Yi glanced at the middle-aged man and nodded. "Of course." The middle-aged man grinned. "I have other matters to attend to. Farewell." He glanced at Snowy, and then he vanished into the distant sky. The Divine Martial Sect. Yang Yi glanced at the bamboo house, and he wondered who the woman called Aling actually was. He was quite curious. Meanwhile, Aling walked out of the house and sat before Yang Yi. She smiled apologetically. "Sorry for making you wait." Yang Yi shook his head. "It's fine," she asked. "You've been to the martial tomb?" Yang Yi nodded. "Yes, and I've obtained information on her." Aling nodded slightly. "That's good to hear." Yang Yi smiled. "Miss Aling, according to our agreement, I should heal you. So please give me your hand." Aling smiled and stretched out her hand. Yang Yi placed his right hand above her palm but didn't touch her skin. His profound energy circulated, and then primordial violet energy seemed out incessantly from his palm and converged into her body. As they flowed into her, Aling's face gradually turned quite red. Right sword and left sword instantly became extremely excited. However, Yang Yi frowned because her body was like a bottomless hole. Suddenly, a powerful aura appeared in the distant sky. A three-world realm expert. A powerful aura enveloped Cloud Residence. At the same time, a voice came from afar. "Yang Yi, you killed many of us guardians. It's time to put an end to that enmity." Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly, and he knew they weren't able to stop themselves from acting against him in the end. Yang Yi was about to stop when she suddenly grabbed his hand. "Continue." She tapped her right foot down and spoke softly. "Ada!" Bang! The ground suddenly cracked open, and then a robust man shot up into the air. A three-world realm expert. Aling closed her eyes and said, "Until I'm fully cured. Even a god can't kill you." Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Needless to say, Yang Yi was quite shocked. A three-world realm expert. Three-world realm experts weren't common. He remembered Nanli Meng saying that practically all three-world realm experts were at the Eternal River. So, the three-world realm expert who'd come for him was clearly from Eternal River. However, Cloud residents had a three-world realm expert too, and that was quite unusual. What was Aling's identity? The robust man had chains coiled around his arms, and he waved his hands around as he stood there high above in the clouds, causing the chains to sweep through the clouds. An old man in a luxurious robe stood deep within the clouds, and he held a black umbrella. Every wave of it made countless rays of black light rain down from above. Rumble. The entire sky shook violently and seemed like it was about to collapse. Aling spoke softly. "Lock down the area." Right sword and left sword nodded slightly, and then they left. It didn't take long for them to appear in the sky with 4 flags in their grasps. They tossed the flags forward, and the flags appeared in 4 corners of the area. Bang! In an instant, the surroundings calmed down. However, the battle was still going on outside. But no matter how the two of them fought there, no fluctuations entered the area. Snowy's eyes lit up when she saw the flags, and she seemed itching to get them. Meanwhile, Aling smiled. "Little fellow, those 4 flags are treasures passed down in my family, so don't try to take them." While she was saying that to Snowy, she was actually talking to Yang Yi. Yang Yi gazed at Snowy and shook his head. Snowy puckered her lips and pointed at the flags to indicate that they were very good. Yang Yi spoke seriously. "They belong to her." Snowy blinked and waved her paws, so was saying that they could become hers instead. Yang Yi had quite the headache. "What kind of shameless logic is that? Who taught you that?" Snowy pointed at Yang Yi to indicate that he did. Yang Yi was stunned speechless. In the end, Snowy didn't try to tempt those flags to follow her because Yang Yi was against it. If she really did that, Yang Yi was certain that the 4 flags wouldn't be able to escape her paws. But even a bandit had to have principles. Aling glanced at Snowy and Yang Yi, and then she smiled. "Young Master Yang, this sprite progenitor of yours is different from what I imagined." It wasn't just difficult. It was absolutely different from what she'd expected. Snowy was just a cute pet. Yang Yi rubbed Snowy's head gently. "I wish she was just an ordinary sprite lord. Being a sprite progenitor is too tiring." Aling smiled and didn't say anything. Snowy hugged Yang Ye's head and rubbed her head against it, and she didn't pay further attention to the flags. A long time passed before Yang Yi looked up at the sky and said, "Miss Aling, these injuries of yours." She'd almost exhausted all his primordial violet energy. She pulled her hand away. "Sorry, I was too greedy." Yang Yi shook his head and said, "Is all that primordial violet energy insufficient to treat your injuries?" She shook her head. "I'm afraid it's far from enough." Yang Yi frowned. Meanwhile, Aling smiled. "How about we do this? I won't take your primordial violet energy for free. I can help you deal with the powers from Eternal Border while you're treating me. If I'm not wrong, you need time right now. The more time you have, the stronger you can be, and you'll have a greater chance at success. Right?" Yang Yi looked toward the sky and spoke softly. "Miss Aling, your identity and strength have really surprised me." She grinned. "What do you think about my suggestion?" Yang Yi nodded. "Deal." Just as she'd said, he lacked time the most. Aling grinned. And then she looked up at the sky. "It's over." As soon as she finished speaking, a ray of light flashed in the sky, and then the robust man appeared before her. He went down on one knee and said, "Forgive me, I failed to kill him." Aling shook her head. "He had the aura of the Eternal River. Anyone able to survive there isn't ordinary. So it's normal that you were unable to kill him." Ada lowered his head slightly. "Forgive me." She smiled. "Go on with your own work." He nodded and vanished on the spot. Yang Yi suddenly said, "Miss Aling, you're not from Eternal Border?" She smiled. "Not really. As for where I'm from, I can't tell you." Yang Yi smiled and didn't pursue an answer. After that, he started to heal her every day. Besides that, he returned to the southern desolate lands to seek guidance from Wu and I and martial ancestor. Yang Yi finally understood the difference between having a master and not having one now. Having a master represented having guidance, and guidance represented the ability to avoid many mistaken paths. While martial ancestor and Wu and I were no sword cultivators, their attainments in the martial Dao was absolutely not something Yang Yi could compare to. There was some overlap between the martial Dao and sword Dao, especially some techniques. Actually, his greatest gain was his flying swords. Now, even two world realm experts couldn't resist them anymore. Not long after Yang Yi left Cloud Residence, an old man in a luxurious robe appeared before the bamboo house. The old man glanced at the surroundings, and then gazed at the bamboo house. "Can we talk?" A voice came from within the bamboo house. 2 weeks. Don't touch him for 2 weeks. After that, you can resolve your enmity on your own. The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. 2 weeks is enough for him to do a lot, like grow a little stronger. Did you not hear me? The voice within the house grew slightly icy cold. The old man grinned. I'm here on behalf of many people, and there are 7 3-world experts among them. As for the 2-world realm experts, I don't have to say much about that. Besides that, some are already on the way to divine martial world, including Xiao Xinwu. According to my knowledge, he desires the sprite progenitor. Are you really going to stop us? The door to the bamboo house suddenly opened, and then a jade token appeared before the old man. The old man was stunned when he saw it. Meanwhile, a voice came from within. Tell them I said to wait for 2 weeks. Come see me if they don't want to wait. The old man took a deep and long glance at the jade token. In the end, he bowed respectfully and said, If you say 2 weeks, then 2 weeks it is. We won't act against him in these 2 weeks. I apologize for my offense. Farewell. He turned around and vanished into the end. Silence fell upon Cloud Residence, the southern desolate lands. Within the primordial pagoda, Yang Yi sat cross-legged on the ground. Cultivate. Presently, he didn't want to waste even a moment of his time. 3 world realm experts had come from Eternal Border, and that meant the experts in Eternal River had started to rush over. He was very well aware that there was definitely more than 1 3-world realm expert, and there may even be 4-world and 5-world realm experts. He had to grow stronger. His strongest attacks right now were the sword domain and the flying swords from the sword gourd. Simply speaking, if he couldn't kill with these 2 moves, then he would be killed instead. Of course, he had many divine treasures like the true energy mirror and seal of suppression. If he used all of them, even a 3-world realm expert would be of no threat to him. Of course, it was a different story if he had to face many of them. As for 4-world realm experts, he hadn't fought one, so he didn't know how strong they were. Suddenly, Yang Yi opened his eyes, and then he left the pagoda and appeared on the cliff. Yang Yi bowed to the 2 old men, and Wu and I said, She's back, and Nanjing is back. Yang Yi was delighted and hurriedly asked, Where is she? Wu and I replied indifferently, At the outer area of the hell world. She seems to be in trouble, so get her. Any objections? Yang Yi shook his head. None at all. Wu and I nodded. Be careful. Be careful. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. Wu and I had told him to be careful. Obviously, the trouble she faced was no ordinary trouble. Suddenly, Wu and I waved his right hand and Yang Yi vanished on the spot. Martial Ancestor suddenly said, You're pushing him into the fire. Wu and I replied indifferently, Just cultivating like this is useless. If he doesn't experience some life and death, it doesn't matter how seriously or painstakingly he cultivates. It won't change much. Battles of life and death are the best to temper someone. Martial Ancestor smiled. That's true. However, that kid doesn't have a very good temper. Aren't you afraid that he'll act rashly? What? Wu and I replied indifferently. His temper will get much better once he meets those madmen. Martial Ancestor shook his head and smiled without saying another word. At an expanse of the starry sky, Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings and was quite bewildered. Wu and I had tossed him here just now. A short while later, Yang Yi looked up, and there was a huge black vortex in the distance, and it covered the entire area. Suddenly, Yang Yi saw a person there, and he was overjoyed. It was a Nanjing. However, ferocity instantly covered Yang Ye's face just a moment later. And Nanjing's left arm was gone, and her entire body was covered in injuries, especially her stomach. Blood was surging from there. There were 5 shadows behind her, and they were madly chasing after her. Ferocity curled up on Yang Ye's lips. In an instant, a ray of red light swept out from him, and then he turned blood red,